Hi besties, welcome to my channel. The title of this story is Ada the Wicked Copper. In a small village called Ilodo, people lived simple and happy lives. They helped each other and loved their home very much. The village was full of trees, little houses and friendly faces. One day, a young woman named Ada came to Ilodo. Ada was from the big city called Lagos. She had to stay in the village for a year to help teach as part of her school program called NYSC. Ada was very beautiful and tall and always wore fancy clothes, and she did not like the village at all. When Ada first arrived, she looked and frowned. The place is dirty and old, she said. She did not like the dusty road or the small houses with thatched roofs. Ada thought the food was strange and didn't taste good. She also laughed at the way the villagers dressed and talked. Why do they wear such funny clothes? She wondered aloud. The villagers tried to be nice to Ada, even though she said mean things. They thought she would get used to their way of life. But Ada did not change. She often told the villagers that their traditions were silly and that they needed to be more modern, like people in the city. Ada was supposed to teach the children at the village school, but she did not like the school because it was small and didn't have many books or computers. Ada told the children they weren't smart because they did not know as much as she did. You need to study harder, she scolded them. The children felt sad and upset because they tried their best, but Ada's words made them feel bad about themselves. As time went on, Ada's attitude made the villagers and the children very unhappy. They tried to include her in their activities and tradition, but Ada always refused. She said their dances and songs were boring and old-fashioned. The villagers started to feel angry and hurt. They couldn't understand why Ada was so mean. One day, the village had a big festival to celebrate the harvest. Everyone dressed in bright colors and danced around a big fire. Chief Olumide, the wise elder of the village, noticed that Ada was standing alone, looking grumpy. He walked over to her and asked, Ada, why don't you join us in the celebration? Ada rolled her eyes and said, this is also silly and outdated. I can't believe people still do this. Chief Olumide signed and replied, Ada, these traditions are important to us. They bring us together and remind us of our history. Ada struggled and walked away. She didn't want to hear about the village tradition. She just wanted to go back to the city where everything were modern and exciting. As the days passed, the villagers began to avoid Ada. They didn't want to be around someone who was always mean and looked down on them. The children didn't want to go to school because they did not like the way Ada made them feel. The villagers and the children started to dislike Ada very much. Ada felt lonely and didn't know why everyone was so cold toward her. She didn't realize that her mean words and action had hurt the villagers' feelings. Instead of trying to understand them, she kept thinking that the villagers were the problem, not her. Ada's time in Ilodo was almost over. The villagers were relieved. They hoped that when Ada left, they could go back to their happy lives without someone always making fun of them. But Ada didn't learn from her time in Ilodo. She remained mean and arrogant, believing she was better than the villagers. Everyone in the village knew each other well. One of the villagers was a young man named Tayo. He was friendly, hardworking and known for his good heart. Tayo admired Ada. Despite her unfriendly attitude, he thought she was beautiful and hoped she would one day see the goodness in the village and its people. One afternoon, Tayo gathered his courage and approached Ada. She was sitting under a tree, looking bored and annoyed. Tayo smiled warmly and said, hello Ada, how are you doing today? Ada barely looked at him. I'm fine, Tayo, what do you want? She replied coldly. Tayo hesitated but then said, I was wondering if you could go for a walk with me. I could show you some nice places around the village. Ada raised her eyebrow and looked at him with disbelief. Why would I want to walk around this dusty village? I have no interest in seeing more of this place, she said sharply. Tayo felt a bit embarrassed but tried to stay positive. Well, I thought it might be nice to spend some time together. Maybe we could get to know each other better. Ada laughed, but not in a kind way. You must be joking. Why would I want to spend time with someone like you? You this dirty village boy. I have nothing in common with you or this place, she sneered. Tayo's face fell, but he tried one last time. Ada, I know you are from the city and things are different there, but if you give it a chance, you might find something to like about Iludu. Maybe we could. Before he could finish, Ada cut him off. Stop it, Tayo. Just stop. You think just because I'm stuck here, I will lower myself to date a village boy? That's ridiculous. I will never date someone like you. You are not good enough for me, she said, her voice full of contempt. Tayo felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He had never had such harsh word directed at him before. The villagers were usually kind and respectful to each other, even when they disagreed. He couldn't understand why Ada was so mean. Ada stood up and walked away, leaving Tayo standing there, hot and confused. As she left, she muttered under her breath, "These villagers just don't get it. I can't wait to leave this place." Tayo watched her go, his heart heavy. He had hoped to show Ada some kindness and maybe make a friend, but she had only responded with cruelty. The other villagers soon heard about what happened. They were even more upset with Ada. They couldn't believe how badly she had treated Tayo, who was one of the nicest people in the village. Ada's mean behavior only made the villagers like her less. They started to avoid her even more, not wanting to be around someone who was so rude and arrogant. Ada, however, did not care. She continued to think she was better than everyone in Iludu and couldn't wait to leave. After Ada's harsh rejection, Tayo was deeply hurt. He couldn't understand why Ada was so mean, not just to him but to everyone in the village. However, Tayo was curious about her. He believed that there might be a kinder side to her that she kept hidden. Driven by a mix of hurt and strange desire to see Ada change, Tayo remembered the story his grandmother had told him about a charmed ring. The ring was said to have the power to make someone fall in love with the first person they saw after putting it on. Tayo knew it was a risky idea, but he was desperate to see a different side of Ada. One day, he went to his grandmother's house and found the ring. It was simple with a small door stone, but it was said to be powerful. Tayo decided to give it a try. The next day, Tayo approached Ada with the ring in his pocket. He found her sitting alone as usual, looking bored. He greeted her with a friendly smile. "Hello, Ada. I wanted to apologize for the other day," he said, holding out the ring and slipping it on his finger. Ada asked suspiciously, "What's this?" she asked. "It's just a simple ring," Tayo said, trying to sound casual. Ada shrugged and her expression softened, and she looked at Tayo with a new, warm gaze. Suddenly, Ada felt a rush of emotion she couldn't understand. Her heart started to beat faster, and she couldn't take her eyes off Tayo. "Tayo," Ada said, her voice unusually gentle. "I never noticed before, but you're really nice and handsome." Tayo was shocked by the sudden change in Ada. The ring seemed to be working, but it was more intense than he had imagined. Ada's attitude towards him transformed completely. She smiled at him, spoke sweetly, and seemed genuinely happy to be around him. It was as if all her coldness had melted away, but only towards him. Ada quickly became obsessed with Tayo. She followed him around, always wanting to be close to him. She would bring him gifts, make him food, and shower him with compliments. To everyone else in the village, Ada's behavior seemed strange and unsettling. She was still as mean as ever to them, often snapping at people or mocking them. But with Tayo, she was completely different. Loving, kind, and almost desperate for his attention. The villagers were confused and worried about the change in Ada. They couldn't understand why she was suddenly so attached to Tayo. while still being unpleasant to everyone else. Some thought she was pretending, while others suspected something more unusual was at play. Tayo himself felt uneasy. He hadn't expected Ada's feelings to become so intense, and he was starting to feel guilty about using the ring. Ada, on the other hand, could not bear to be away from Tayo. She would get anxious if she did not see him and would become upset if someone else tried to talk to him. Her obsession grew stronger each day. She began to isolate herself from the villagers even more, only focusing on Tayo. The villagers were at a loss. They could see that something was very wrong, but they didn't know how to help Ada or Tayo. Meanwhile, Tayo felt trapped by the situation he had created. He wanted to tell Ada the truth about the ring, but he was afraid of how she would react. As Ada's obsession with Tayo grew, the tension in the village also increased. The villagers started to avoid Ada completely, wary of her unpredictable behavior. Tayo, feeling the weight of his action, wondered how long he could keep the truth hidden and what would happen if Ada ever found out. Ada's sudden intense affection for Tayo became the talk of Iludu, spreading quickly among the villagers and also reaching the other coppers who were also serving in the village. The other NYC members couldn't believe the change in Ada. They remembered how she used to sneer at the villagers, especially calling Tayo a dirty, ugly village boy. Now she was completely obsessed with him, always by his side and acting as if he was the most important person in the world. The other couples found the situation amusing and bizarre. They often whispered and giggled among themselves, making jokes about Ada's new behavior. "Did you see Ada today? She's like a puppy following Tayo around," one couple said, laughing. Another added, "It's hard to believe she used to think she was too good for anyone here. Now she's in love with Tayo. It's like a strange joke." Despite the teasing, Ada seemed oblivious to their comments and the stares. Her entire focus was on Tayo, and she did not care what anyone else thought. She spent all her time with him, helping him with his chores, bringing him gifts, and constantly talking about how wonderful he was. The other couples and villagers watched in amusement as Ada, once so proud and dismissive, now doted on Tayo with a kind of obsession. As the service year neared its end, the couples began preparing to return to their homes in the city. They were excited to leave the village behind and get back to their lives. However, Ada was different. While the other couples talked about their plans and packed their bags, Ada showed no interest in leaving Iludu. In fact, the thought of leaving Tayo filled her with dread. One evening, as the couples gathered to discuss their departure, Ada made a surprising announcement. "I'm not going back to Lagos," she said firmly. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. "I've decided to stay here in Iledun," she continued, with Sayo. The other couples exchanged glances, unsure if Ada was serious. One of them, a girl named Ife, spoke up. "Ada, are you sure? I mean, you always talk about how much you hated it here." Ada shook her head, a determined look in her eyes. "I was wrong before. I've come to realize how much I care about Tayo and this place. I'm not leaving him behind." The coppers were stunned. They had never seen Ada like this, so resolute and sure of herself. Tayo, who was standing nearby, looked equally shocked. He hadn't expected Ada to make such a decision, especially after everything that had happened. After a few weeks, it became clear that Ada was serious about staying. She had started making plans to find a job in the village and talked about building a life there with Sayo. The villagers who had been skeptical of Ada's intention began to accept that she might actually want to be part of their community, even if her behavior was still strange. Tayo, however, felt increasingly conflicted. While he had been flattered and intrigued by Ada's sudden affection, he knew that it was as a result of the charmed ring. He felt guilty for causing this situation and worried about what would happen if Ada ever found out. Moreover, the intensity of her feelings made him uncomfortable. The other couples continued to gossip and laugh about the situation, calling Ada the girl who fell for a village boy. They found it all very entertaining, not understanding the deeper issues at play. As the end of the service year approached, tensions grew. Ada's obsession with Tayo showed no signs of fading, and her decision to stay in Iledun had disrupted everyone's expectations. The villagers, the coppers, and even Tayo himself were unsure of what the future held. Ada's bond with Tayo was growing stronger. Despite her attitude towards everyone else, her affection for Tayo only seemed to deepen. One day, Ada began to feel unusually tired and nauseous. She dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the stress of the upcoming event. But as the days went on, her symptoms persisted. Finally, Ada went to the local clinic where she received surprising news. She was pregnant. The news left her both stunned and excited. She immediately went to Tayo, sharing the news with a mix of joy and nervousness. "Tayo, we are going to have a baby," Ada said, her eyes widened with a mixture of emotions. Tayo was speechless. He had never imagined this turn of events. The news of the pregnancy spread quickly through the village, and everyone knew. The villagers were shocked, and other couples were both amused and concerned. They couldn't believe that Ada, who had once looked down on everyone in Ilodo, was now preparing to start a family there. As her time at the Corper's Lodge came to an end, Ada made a firm decision. She moved in with Sayo, choosing to live in his modest home rather than to return to Lagos. This decision caused a stir, especially among her family. Her parents, Rebecca and Daniel, were extremely worried when they heard the news. They had always disapproved of Ada's involvement in the village life and had hoped she would return to Lagos to continue her career and live a more suitable life. Daniel and Rebecca called Ada, pleading with her to come back to Lagos. "Ada, please come home," her mother Rebecca begged over the phone. "This isn't the life we wanted for you. You deserve better than living in a village with no opportunities." Ada, however, was firm in her decision. "Mommy, I know this isn't what you expected, but I love Tayo and I'm happy here," she replied. "I have found someone I want to spend the rest of my life with, and we are going to have a baby. This is my decision." Her father, Daniel, tried to persuade her as well. "Ada, think about your future, about your career. What about the life we planned for you?" Ada shook her head, though they couldn't see her. "Dad, I know you and Mom want the best for me, but this is what's best for me now. I want to marry Tayo and build a life here in Iludun. Please understand." Her parents were heartbroken and frustrated. They couldn't understand why Ada would choose this path, especially after all the sacrifices they had made for her education and future. They continued to call and plead, but Ada remained resolute. She felt a deep attachment to Tayo, amplified by the charmed ring's influence. Though she didn't know it, her love for him overshadowed everything else, including her parents' concern and the life she once had in Lagos. Meanwhile, Tayo was caught in a dilemma. He felt guilty for the situation, knowing that the charmed ring had influenced Ada's feelings. He wondered if her love was genuine or merely a result of the charm. But with Ada now pregnant and insistent on staying, Tayo found himself unable to tell her the truth, fearing it may shatter her world and cause her undue distress. As Ada settled into her new life with Tayo, the villagers continued to watch with a mix of curiosity and concern. They wondered how long Ada's obsession would last and what the future held for the couple. Ada's parents, Daniel and Rebecca, were deeply troubled by their daughter's decision to stay in Iledu. They couldn't fathom why she would choose a simple village life over the opportunities in Lagos. Desperate to change her mind, they decided to visit the village and bring